Welcome, Makayla. So excited to have you.
Oh, thanks, Jeannie. I'm excited to be here. So about me, my name is Makayla Gessford, and I'm currently residing in Boston, Massachusetts. But I am an adoptee. So I was born in China in 1992, and then I was adopted by a single white mother in 1994. So when I was about 2 years old, and I grew up along the West Coast in Oregon, and I was like raised in a white family and I went to like predominantly white schools. So I didn't really start leaning into any kind of Asian identity until I was maybe in college and started seeing more diversity there. But yeah, I guess that's a little bit about me and my
That's
background.
interesting intro because you really pointed out racial identity. I'm noticing. So I guess
Mhm.
before we go into K dramas, well, let's actually talk about that. The connection with K dramas and you. How did that happen? Tell us more about how you got into it, or how you're not into it, and how you started watching.
Sure, it's interesting. Like I don't really know why, but I didn't even think that like Asian media existed because I grew up like completely American, right? So I grew up with like American media. I didn't watch any kind of TV show or movie or anything that was created by people of color, usually that also showed any people of color in it. And so I didn't discover K-dramas until I think 2000, probably 15 or 16, and I discovered them through my husband at the time. His brother was really into K dramas.
Mhm.
And so my husband at the time, now my ex-husband, he's Chinese and his brother's Chinese. And his brother, very like, they're very in touch with their Asian identity. Like he lived in China for many years and he was just like more involved with like media, and like he just knew what else to watch and what even was there. And so I saw him watching like a K drama one time at our apartment because we lived together. And I was just like, what is this? Like, what are you watching? And he was actually watching Descendants of the Sun. And
Oh,
I remember it was so interesting when I like first was like kind of watching it and just reading along. My brain could not wrap itself around Korean language. I was like, what are they saying? I can't even distinguish words or phrases or sentences or anything. It was so foreign to me.
hmm.
But I was so wrapped up in the story because I think it was probably like the second or third episode. So still like
Good
really
one
hooking you
too.
in. Yeah, it was a really good one. And so I was just like, what is this? And then he told me, and then I decided to watch it myself later. And I was like, okay, I'm hooked. It was so good.
Wow. And so that's interesting. So, yes, before that, not really exposed to Asian media. So, you were
Mhm.
trying to wrap out. So, before then, you didn't even hear Chinese.
I mean, I'd heard Chinese through like my partner at the time, so my ex-husband and his family. So
Mhm.
they all speak like Mandarin, and so I've heard Chinese, and I've watched his mom watch Chinese shows. Korean was pretty different though. I mean, I think
Mm.
I had maybe heard of Korean dramas, but I was still kind of in that headspace of like, oh, that seems like a very dweeb thing, or I don't know.
Right.
I
Like
just
very
had
distant.
Yeah, it seems so far away. And I didn't really understand the appeal, or I thought that they were too dramatic because that was kind of the stereotype that I knew about them and the impression that I had. So I was like, oh, that's not what I would be interested in, and just kind of wrote it off without even checking it out.
So, then speaking of which, what then got you hooked into Descendants of the Sun? Let's talk about what brought you into the K drama world.
Yeah, like I said, it was kind of an accident because he was watching it at our apartment. And so I just was like sitting on the couch and watching it with him. And I was just confused at what was happening. But at the same time, I was like, this is really good. Like, I don't know anything about this plot or this storyline, but I was like, this is like, it was making me emotional.
Hmm.
Um, Even though I hadn't watched, like, I don't even know what episode he was on. It was just like really, I thought it was just really good storytelling. And so that's what got me into it. And then after watching that one, of course, he had like a list of other K dramas. And then I started talking about them more, and other people kept telling me, like, oh, watch this one or watch that one. I think the next one that I watched was Pinocchio. Someone
Something
told me to
different.
watch that, and I was like, well, this was really good. So I just kept going from there. There was a period of time, probably from, I don't know, a couple years where I pretty much only exclusively watched Korean dramas. Like I didn't consume any other media. And I don't think even you knew about that about me, but I was like really into them.
No, I didn't know that. So let's
Yeah.
talk about that because you talked about being an adoptee.
Hmm.
When you were really getting into this K dramas, if that's all you watched, any of that kind of tie in to your adoptee experience? I guess I'm curious.
Yeah, I would say at that time, no, but it's less so because of a lack of exposure to different stories. It was more because just me and where I was at in my journey of kind of like coming to terms with my adoptee identity. I didn't really consider that as part of my identity. I was very much what you would call in the fog. There's this term in the adoptee world, it's like being in the fog, which is basically just speaking to um, not necessarily seeing the ways in which like predominant adoption narratives and the
Mm,
industry can kind of harm adoptees and adoptee experiences. And so again, I was just very, I didn't really think of myself as an adoptee. I was like, I'm Chinese, I'm Asian, but that's just like a fact of life. You know, it's not really contributing to me and who I am and my identity a lot. So when I was watching all these K dramas, it was purely more for entertainment. And I think if anything that I got out of them more was on kind of the relationship side of things. Because like
mhm.
Korean dramas are very heavily romantic and very like relationship focused. And so I think if anything, they just kind of opened my eyes to a different type of relationship that's out there. And it's not to say that those are even real, but just because, again, the only media that I had consumed was American media, which portrays relationships in a very different way, like K dramas does. That was like mind blowing to me as well. And also just getting to see so many faces that look like my own. Like I know I'm not Korean, but just seeing other Asians was really amazing because outside of when we would like travel to China for visits and stuff, like I just you don't have that around here.
That's really cool. So I gave you an assignment. So we'll talk about this, folks. Noona's Noonchi. I decided, well, because I've known Makayla for a while, and I felt like with her adoptee experience recently, her uncovering some things. I said, let's watch Healer because, and you actually did watch Healer. So let's talk about the first time you watched it. But she had already watched it, just some background. But then she watched it again through a different lens, and we're going to talk about that experience. So tell us the first time that you saw Healer, because I know you saw it, and I remember you saying, "Oh, I liked it."
Yeah, it's so funny because when you told me I should watch Healer with this adoptee lens, I was like, that sounds so familiar. And I think I watched it probably 3 or 4 years ago
Mhm.
now, maybe.
Yeah.
So the first time I watched it, it was purely just because I was like on a K-drama kick and I needed to watch a new one. And I was like, this was a top rated one. It was like recommended. It had a lot of the actors that I like. And I was like, okay, I'll just watch it. And I didn't think anything of the adoptee related experience while I was watching it, other than when they do introduce the main female character as adopted. I was like, "Oh, that's cool."
Mm. But
It
you
didn't.
didn't really connect it to yourself.
No, not at the time. All I think there was maybe only one thing that I related to at that time, which was at the very end of the first episode when she's like in her bed and she's on her phone, or I don't know what she's doing, but she's just like in her bed, like thinking to herself, and you can hear her thoughts.
Hmm.
And she was kind of like reminiscing on the time when her, I don't know, something when she was younger with her dad and just like acknowledging her adoption story. And she's like, I just feel like an android. She's like, I just want to know if I'm a robot or if I'm even like a real human or something. She's kind of talking about that. And I do remember relating to that the first time as well, but that kind of being the end of it. Like I didn't really look into any other facets of the story or her character development or the people around her from kind of an adoptee identity perspective. It was just like, this is a cool story. And
Yeah.
again, a good love story and all these things.
Right. So now
Yeah.
this time around, let's kick it off with how different it was. Let's just start with an overview of you watched Healer, you took notes.
I took a lot of notes.
Yeah, and I guess, well, how about what's one thing you can share? I mean, I'm sure there's lots of things you can share, but what's one thing that you saw recurring as you were watching that you're like kept persisting at you as you're watching from an adoptee lens?
Yeah. Um, it was very triggering, honestly, like, but I think because I've done a lot of work to not like get overly emotional by a lot of the triggers, it was okay. But I think one of the biggest takeaways that kept reoccurring was actually her relationship with her dad
Mhm,
and how good it is, like how healthy it is. And I was like, that is not, my experience is my own, of course, and each adoptee has their own experience with their adoptive parents and their birth parents, if they've been in contact or not, and those sorts of things. But I think seeing the way in which her dad was so healthy and kind of being able to talk to her about her adoption story, supporting her in, you know, wanting to find her birth mom, and like when she finally did, like basically bringing her into her life, I was like, that is the most rare, not
mhm.
the that's not the common story that you hear. That is the complete opposite, actually. And so for me, it was kind of like triggering in an angering way where I was like, you're portraying a false story of what happens in adoptee lives, because adoptees are actually 4 times more likely to commit suicide. Like, where, I'm not trying to speak for everybody, but like there is a lot of darkness there that doesn't get acknowledged. And I think in some ways the show did do a good job of kind of showing you that through letting you into her mind and some of her thoughts.
Mhm.
But her relationship with her dad, it was just like so striking in how healthy it was. And I was
Mm,
like, that should be put on a pedestal because it's something to aim for, and like we need to highlight that. But I was just like, that's not the normal experience based
yeah,
on
right.
my own personal one, but also from what I hear from a lot of other adoptees. It's like that's very rare.
Wow. I mean, thanks for highlighting that. And so here's what I hear: emotional, like just feeling triggered but angry.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I think because, and I just think that there were a lot of other aspects of like abandonment trauma or searching for birth family that, again, were very portrayed in a really interesting way. For example, the whole story basically being formed around this concept of everyone searching for this girl. Like
Hmm.
literally everyone in
Yeah.
this story is searching for this girl. And like, of course, we don't know who it is, but then we discover it's the main character. And you're like, okay,
Hmm.
everyone has invested their entire lives and all of their money and energy into figuring out who you are and where you are. And I think that that was also triggering because a lot of adoptees, many of us may have some sort of fantasy, right, about like our lives. I know I certainly have. I've fantasized about like my birth family wanting so badly to find me that they would do anything, or maybe finding myself in China one day and then bumping into them across the street or at the grocery store and having it be this like really dramatic ordeal, kind of like how it's shown in this drama. It's like, of course, that's not the truth. And of course, that's not going to happen. I mean, I guess you can never say never. And there are those random news stories that you hear of like something similar kind of occurring. Um, but again, it was kind of, I want to say painful to, or it was just hard to watch this time
Yeah.
through. It's like seeing how much everyone wanted to find her, when in reality for me and my personal story is like uh probably never gonna find out. Like, don't even know if my birth parents are alive. And even if they were, they probably wouldn't have any kind of means to do any searching or probably any kind of interest in like finding me. So that was kind of hard to watch because it's like, again, reality versus a drama.
Sure. Wow.
Yeah.
So just saying, this is like an 180-degree turn of like your first time around, where you really enjoyed it because you're into
Yeah.
K-dramas. It was fun. This time around, because you're in a different space. Now it's called Healer. Was any part of the K-drama watching it, do you feel like you had some angry triggers, but anything in there where there was some sort of healing, or you felt like you had a better understanding, or you just watched it and went, no, you know what? I don't think I would have wanted to watch this. I guess I'm curious at your overall experience.
Overall, I think this is just a personal thing I have. Like, I do struggle watching TV shows that have real people in them now. Like, I can primarily watch animated, like, anime
Mhm.
now
You like
because
anime.
I like anime a lot. And I think it's because it's just hard for me to watch things with people, real people in them, unless it seems genuine and authentic to me.
Hmm.
And so because a lot of the story, while parts of it may have been genuine and authentic in terms of portraying certain aspects of whoever these characters were, I think in my mind it's like so far from what the truth is. It was like, this is ridiculous, you know? And
Wow.
so I've for me to be able to enjoy it, I really had to like step out of this headspace of thinking about it as if it could be reality, which I know you should never really think of dramas that way, but I really have to be like, this is a drama. It's supposed to be dramatic. Like, the story is made to elicit strong emotions from you and to make you feel certain ways and to like take you on a roller coaster because it's purely entertainment.
Yes,
Um,
but you also still wanted to enjoy it, right? And clearly
right.
this time around, so it sounded like you did it just because I gave you the assignment, or would you feel, I'm just curious. I mean,
I mean, I
going
did, but I
through
was
it.
also curious. Like, I was really curious to go back and be like, what was this story like, you know? And because I do enjoy it. Like, their K-dramas are really easy to watch because they're so good at like with the cliffhangers
Yeah.
and hooking you into the story and really making you fall for characters and then totally like throwing in a plot twist where you're like, oh my God, they're actually the murderer, you know? So I think that's really fun, but at the same time, I don't know, maybe it's because for me, when it comes to anything adoptee identity related, I I always am over conservative in what I think should be shown or talked about just
Mhm.
because I'm like, you never know what could really hurt someone, like really truly hurt them. And so it's not something to be joked about, in my opinion. Like, it's one of those things that unless you're going to do it right, then don't do it. Like, don't do it at all, but make sure that you are, I don't know, slapping the right disclaimers on or providing safe spaces for the right kind of dialogue around it, like we're doing right now,
Yeah.
because it could
No,
have
I
really
agree.
inadvertent negative effects.
And
Yeah.
I'll echo that to validate you, because the whole point is, just to, if we're talking mental health, to feel validated. So clearly when you watched it the second time, it was invalidating is what I'm hearing.
In some aspects. There were other aspects that I think were validating, like I would say the relationship portion.
Hmm.
So part of me was like, I wonder if they're doing this on purpose because she's an adoptee, and I wonder if they've done research into like abandonment trauma and attachment styles, and that's why the way that she and the main character dude are going about their kind of fling, or if it's just because it's a K drama and that's kind of how all K drama romances go, you
Wait,
know.
what do you
So
mean? Describe it a little bit more, how you thought this is valid.
sure. I guess for example, kind of uh here, let me reference my notes
Yeah, she's gonna
because
reference her notes.
that was something big. And one thing that I think also doesn't get talked about, but that's kind of related, is that you could also consider healer an adoptee as well.
Right. No, exactly right. Yeah, I was definitely focusing more on the girl. I forget her name, considering how popular she was. But
Uh,
eh,
Shin or something.
yeah, it's something. Gosh, I mean, I've seen it twice. It's a while, but yeah, you're right. I mean, there are some commonalities with their experiences.
Taeyong Shin, yeah.
That's it. Okay. So yeah, refer to your notes, but I'm glad. I mean, it's good to hear that there's something validating, and that was mainly in their relationship. So I guess I'm curious what that is.
Yeah, I think it's like because in their relationship, there's a lot of you get to see each of them individually, kind of in
Mhm.
their own mind, and
Yes.
you see them going through a lot of turmoil individually of like, oh, I really want to be around this person, but I can't. Both of them kind of going through that, and I think that in my mind, I was relating that a lot to abandonment trauma and something that I've personally felt a lot of, this sense of I love you so much, so I can't get close to you, and I can't tell you that, because then it means that I could potentially lose you, and that would be harder than just like loving you. Um, and again, I don't want to speak for all adoptees, but that is a common kind of experience that I've heard. And it comes from sort of this primary narrative, again, this predominant narrative that we're told. It's like, you were loved so much that you were given away. And
Right.
so for us, it's like there's this correlation. Sorry, I shouldn't say for us, but like there can become a correlation with like loss and love, and
Mm-hmm.
then thinking that love has to mean loss,
Mm,
right? And not knowing how to kind of approach relationships in a healthy way, because it's like, I want to be so close to you, but my instinct is to push you away,
right.
because that's somehow been weirdly embedded into, I don't know, like my psyche of what it means to love.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah,
this really
no,
interesting
these
thing
are
'cause,
very
like,
polar opposites to think about it,
super
really.
polarizing, and, like, you
Yeah.
see that a lot with the dude, especially when,
And look,
Chae Shin, she's, like, texting him, she's like, "Why won't you talk to me? Blah, blah, blah," and he's just sitting there like, "I love you, so I can't respond," right? And it's like, "Oh, really, dude?
that's also
Like, come
typical
on."
K-drama. I can't show you my feelings, but I love you so yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, so I
but
was
I
like,
agree.
I don't know if they're doing this to demonstrate that they've done research into, like,
But it
probably
sounds
not.
like that's how you interpreted it, because I think people can
Yeah.
interpret K-dramas themselves, like, their own way.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So
K-drama.
that was something interesting, and then, yeah, I w there was another interesting thing that I wanted to bring up, which was, I don't know if you remember the scene when, so, okay, the thing with Healer, right, like, the main character dude, is he was, like, kicked out of home when
Mhm.
he was really young, right, by
Right,
his mom, because she wanted to remarry a different guy, and he didn't like the kid. He
yeah,
didn't like him,
right.
which is really messed up.
Mhm.
Um, but I mean, unfortunately, that happens to children. And so then he was like left on the streets, and then he was taken in by the first healer.
Right.
And that's kind of like his adoption in some ways. Like he's given this new caretaker and like this new life. And a couple things that were really striking about that was like, the scene when the first healer is leaving the new main character, and
Mhm.
how painful it is for him,
Mhm.
and how a lot of what he talks about is like, because first I lost my family and my mom, and then I lost him, and so it's like, oh, I don't want to get close to this girl because I'm just gonna lose her.
Right, right.
um that hit really close to home. And then also the scene where, it's interesting, it's like a flashback
Mhm.
to when he was younger and goes to his mom's house, and I don't remember why he was there, but it was weird that like the dad that his mom had remarried to was suddenly like begging him to come home,
Mhm.
and how he
I
was
don't
like,
remember that one. Yeah.
"I'm angry, like, no, why the hell would I come home when you're the one that kicked me out?" I just thought that was really weird. And
Hmm.
I was
Do
like,
you know
"I don't
the
know what they're
context
doing
behind that?
here."
I don't remember that. This is why, like, those nuances, but that struck you. Why? What was about that?
I think again, it comes down to like, because a lot of people, or just like because being abandoned, there is always a part of myself that will want to know like why, or will be curious about like who I was actually abandoned by. Like at least for him, he like knows his mother, and they were in contact kind of, like you
Mhm.
saw them go
Yeah.
get dessert every once in a while, like twice or three times throughout the whole show. The point being, like, he could contact her if he wanted to. But then this other dude, I don't know, because it seemed like a weird like tease, because the thing with like reunification for adoptees, it can be very challenging, and that's something that a lot of adoptees experience, is like attempting to reunite with birth families, and then sometimes being rejected, or sometimes being welcomed in, and it just being a very like tumultuous thing. And
Sure.
so I don't know, it wasn't angering anyway, it was just, I just thought it was more interesting how they decided to bring that into the storyline, because I'm like, what point are they trying to make here? And like, why
Mhm.
would that not birth father, but like, why would that man suddenly want him back in the family after being the reason why he was kicked out?
That's a good point.
um
Cover that. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Wow.
so it was just really strange. I was like, I don't really know what to make of this. If
Mhm.
anything, I feel like it's done for him is just reaffirm that like I can't trust anybody.
Mm.
Like, I can't trust anybody and what they're saying about if they truly want me in their lives or not. Like, how am I supposed to know? And that's why I have to keep everybody in arm's length. This is why I work on my own. This is why I refuse to even acknowledge how much I care about Ajuma, right? Because like I'm gonna keep her at arm's length through all this like banter and kind of like mockery when in reality, like she's very precious to me, but I don't want to acknowledge it because it's too hard.
Yeah. So interesting point, Ajma. Yeah, remember that she had a cool role.
Yeah.
So since it's called Healer, now coming full circle and watching the end, you know how the whole point of K dramas, right? People evolve and then there's some resolution or some growth or resiliency or hope.
Hmm.
After watching it this time around, because the first time around was very different, what were you left with? Did you still feel like there was some hopefulness, or you felt like, wow, I mean, translating it back to my experience, this wasn't good for my mental health. I guess I want the real truth of how this experience was for you this time around.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think just purely from a like show perspective, I think they tried to cram way too much in the last like 2 episodes. I was like, whoa,
Yeah,
you
they
could
always
have
do.
spread
Mhm.
that out a little bit. It seemed like you just tried to tie it all up in a really nice bow. Um, but I think overall, it so the kind of ending scenes where she like gets a cookie from her mom's and she hasn't quite yet told her that it was that she like knows who she is, but then you see her talking to her dad and like them sharing the cookie together, and talking about how they want how do we want to bring her into like our lives, and then again more of the ending scenes of like her getting to come to the cafe and like you see everyone being sort of this happy family. I think in some ways it was healing because it's like here's an example of how you could approach families coming together in a healthy way, and it's like this is what people should aspire to, right? Like if you're an adoptive parent, look at how this father is approaching things, because I actually think he did a really good job of acknowledging her birth mom and making sure that she was an important figure, because a lot of adoptive parents get triggered by the mention of birth parents, and it's like they feel attacked if adoptees express any desire to know more or even to meet them or find them, because it's like, well, I'm the one who raised you, right? It's like,
Mhm.
well, it's not always about that,
Right.
but there's a lot of this kind of it's like then it just creates a lot of like internal conflicts for an adoptee. And so I think the way that her father approached it was very supportive and very healing. And so for me, it was like, this is nice because I like seeing the way that that's portrayed. But
Mm.
again, it was kind of, I wouldn't say angering, more just saddening to think that, like, I don't think I'll ever get that. I don't, I will probably never get to know who my birth mother is, let alone have her be part of my family and daily life now as an adult.
And I think you're right. That isn't that pretty rare. I mean, that's what you see it in the news, right? When the birth parents get together after some years, right?
It's
Uh,
super rare.
yeah, it's
And
super rare.
especially for, folks like myself, like I'm a transracially and transnationally adopted person, like I'm adoptee. And when you look at what was happening in my birth country in China at the time, there was a lot of coercion, a lot of poor record keeping, a lot of lying by not only families and individuals to literally try to save themselves, but also, officials and government people to falsify information. So it kind of becomes an impossible task anyway to try to find things. And then even if you were to find something, you question it. It's like,
Mhm.
well, would we even know if this is the truth or not?
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. So I'm like, I think that's super cool in the sense of, yes, it was a very different experience where the first time around was just much more on the superficial end, really. But you're just emphasizing what I tell people about depending on where you are at within your journey, right? And
Yeah.
Healer looked very different.
Yeah. I'm looking at my notes a little bit. One thing that I had also written down was that I think Healer, so the main dude character, I think he was kind of like an extreme portrayal of like severe abandonment trauma.
Interesting.
I think it can get even more severe and extreme past a lot of things that he demonstrated. But I think that, you know, his quick temper and like how angry he would get, or not being able to express himself emotionally, but instead leaning into things like throwing objects or I don't know, wanting to go beat people up. Um,
And
I
then
think
hence
that
the work
that
he
can
did,
happen.
right? The stealth
Exactly.
job he did to begin with.
Yeah, and then again, just going back to like the keeping everybody at arm's length. You know, most like myself, I've obviously never isolated myself to that extent, but I always felt that isolated. Like I always felt like I was completely alone. And I do realize it was because I was keeping people at an arm's length, but I didn't go so far as to like totally become a recluse and live alone and only talk to someone through the phone, you know, those kind of things. But I think that he could be looked at as kind of a extreme example of like abandonment trauma, and how it can leave like these lasting effects on you and show up in different ways.
Hmm. I think that's fascinating how we have these different experiences watching K dramas and reflecting it onto our life, clearly yours.
Yeah.
So, just to, I guess, summarize and wrap up, is this, in all honesty, would you recommend to a fellow adoptee to watch Healer?
I think it would really depend on the adoptee. So I would want to understand where that adoptee is at in sort of their own journey of identity discovery, kind of where they're at in terms of coming into healing or acceptance of their own journey and their history. Because I think depending on that, I would say yes or no.
Sure, because everyone's in their own journey.
Right. Everyone's in a different place. And also, maybe if I knew, you know, that a particular person was just very emotional at the time about certain aspects of maybe their own story, I would not recommend it for certain reasons. Um, or I would, you
Sure.
know, I think it just depends on the person. And actually, sorry, if we have time, there was one other thing
No,
that
mention,
really
yeah.
bothered me about the show.
Uh-huh.
Um, was okay, so again, everybody's looking for the main girl, and there are so many people around her who know the truth of who she is, who her parents are, where they are, but no one will tell her.
Hmm.
And that was really angering for me because that happens, like that is happening. A
Uh,
lot of adoptions are closed adoptions, right? Which means that adoptees themselves are not able to gain access to their own information. And that is something that is really controversial within the adoptee sort of space because it's like, shouldn't every person have rights to their own information? And it goes back again to like this coercion aspect where it's like all these other people around you know the questions that you've been asking yourself your whole life. Where did I come from? Like, who are my parents? Like, why did they leave me? Or why, you know, what happened to me? And it's like all the people around her knew and nobody would tell her until the very end. And I was like, that to me was so frustrating. And
uh,
not because it's a drama, but because it again has to do with like, don't I have a right to know my own story?
you're right. And that's interesting. So, and you're saying this happens a lot.
This happens, yes. Like
Wow.
um adoptees will request information like their paperwork and stuff, and again kind of depending on if it's domestic, international, through which group and agency, sometimes they'll be like redacted information, or sometimes they'll be like, we're not allowed to tell you anything at all, but yes, we know your birth mother and we know where she is, but we can't tell you.
Yeah, I would definitely feel like that's infuriating. So thank you for sharing that. I mean, this, to me, I think, I hope people listening will, whatever space they're in their adoptee journey, their transracial adoptee or whatever, however they want to identify, I hope that this was enlightening for them. But I will ask you this. You were so into K dramas, and then we kind of discussed this assignment. What's your take on K dramas in general now? Like, where are you now in your K drama journey?
Yeah, I think a similar space where it's just like I watch them when I want to purely be entertained. And I really have to put myself in that headspace of like, okay, Makayla, don't get triggered about things or don't think about it too seriously because this is meant to be a portrayal of, of like an exaggerated story. It's called K-drama, meant to be dramatic. I
Right.
Yeah, I actually had to stop watching them for a while because I kept getting so triggered with how they were showing relationships, and this was after I got divorced. I was like,
Yeah.
true love isn't real. Like no guy would ever do that for me, or like anybody. Like no, that will never happen, you know? And I was like fed up with how happy and like romantic and everything was. And that was more like me and personally where I was. But I think where I'm at with them now is, again, like I think they're great. I think they're really well written. I think they're very, like, the acting is amazing. I love the representation that they have, and also just getting to see more insights into like Korean culture through them.
Yeah.
But I definitely have to be in the right like headspace to truly enjoy them. But I'm that way with any kind of media that shows real people.
Yeah, because you like anime. No, but I love that
I really-
realness because I think you're bringing up a good point. The part of K-dramas and honestly triggering depending on what you're experiencing. I've heard that. Even body image, people watching. Look, think about the people on
Yeah,
K-dramas. I mean, they look pretty perfect, which isn't necessarily realistic. So
yeah,
I appreciate that realistic insight because I want folks to know that, yeah, just because it's K-drama, if it's not boding well for you, you don't have to watch them, right?
yeah.
It's for
Mhm.
it's for fun, and it really should be. So if it's triggering, then perhaps don't watch it, and that's why
Yeah.
you take a break.
Because like other randomly triggering things in that show for me were the misogyny that's portrayed. Um, when that evil guy who, when he
Right.
was like beating this woman, or not even beating her, but basically knowing that that's what he was guilty of,
Sure.
and then just kind of seeing again like these insights into parts of the culture that to me are really ugly. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like only valuing someone for their looks, or yeah, thinking that women have no place. A lot of it for me is the misogyny, and just
Yeah.
I
And people
get
have said
super triggered
that, right?
by that.
And again, and I will say people have said the misogyny, but then like, well, I'll overlook it because it is fun. Just kind of what you said, right? In the sense of let me just see this as a drama. But you're right, that is a common theme, and that we have to admit that's part of the culture, right?
Right. And then I have to think like, sure, it's just part of the drama, but for how long are we going to continue allowing this type of portrayal to exist? Because it is having impacts on us subtly, subconsciously, but also consciously, right? You're still sending a particular message. And to someone who may not be so self-aware or aware of like society in that way, they may take it as like fact or truth or reality, or
True.
they may internalize a lot of that. um, and then you have no idea how that's going to damage them or influence them as they continue to like grow.
Yeah.
So that's where I also question, sure, it's a drama, but don't you also have some responsibility still to bring in more diversity, to push against the status quo, to, show different types of stories and different types of strengths in people. Yeah.
Agree with
So
that.
that part also kind of gets to me with K dramas.
Yes, and I appreciate this realistic point of view. Thank you so much for sharing, Makayla. And maybe we'll give a break, but maybe do another assignment because I do want you to watch
Yeah.
Vincenzo's good too. It's a very different angle though, but we'll discuss it and maybe bring you back on to discuss Vincenzo, who's also a very interesting story with the adoption and his own adoptee experience. So thanks for joining. Thanks for joining Noona's Noonchi.
Thank you for having me, Jeannie. This was so fun. And honestly, like, I really appreciate you asking me to do this and like being open to listening to a different perspective.
Of
So
course,
yeah, I think we need more of that, like that dialogue.
I agree. Thanks.
Thanks.
You can listen in on platforms such as Spotify, Pandora, Google, and Apple, but also watch the podcast on our Noona's Noonchi YouTube channel every Monday where it launches at 6 p.m. Eastern.